Well, as promised, very excited to be joined today by Mike Greenberg. You can follow him on social media. A lot of you probably do at ESPN Green. He's on TV on ESPN every morning. He's got a radio show. He's been in the industry for a long time. It's crazy because I've listened to him and watched him for so long. But Mike, I don't know that we've ever actually met, to my knowledge.
I think this is right, and I hope I will not be an enormous disappointment. I usually find that people are disappointed by me, so I hope that I live up to some shred of what your expectation is.
Well, no, I got to tell you, I haven't read the whole thing, but you got a new book out with Paul Hembo. I don't even know how to say his last name, Hembekides?
But just call him Hembo. Everyone calls him Hembo. I'm not 100% sure that his wife knows how to say his last name.
But for those of you, by the way, that are watching on YouTube, I'm showing the book right now. It's Got Your Number, The Greatest Sports Legends and the Numbers They Own. It's really cool because, first of all, anybody that ever played a sport, Mike, as you know, like your numbers, like your identity, man. Like I had to be 32 in high school basketball because Andy Kuhn, when I was a little kid, was 30. I had to be 55. And then my wife still makes fun of me because I was in college. My first couple years in the NFL, I had a chain with my number. And she's always like, if we get an argument, Mike, she'll literally say, you used to have a chain with your number on it. like that's her argument.
Well, that's a trump card. I mean, generally that's it. If you used to have a chain with a number on it and she knows that, you're going to lose every argument you have for the rest of your life. That is the principle of the book. So let me tell you quickly where it came from. So we were sitting around, a bunch of us who work on the Get Up show, and like any other collection of sports geeks, we were just having a meaningless sports conversation. And the topic, for some reason, was how many Hall of Fame quarterbacks all wore the jersey number 12. So Joe Namath, Jim Kelly, Roger Staubach, Bob Greasy, Terry Bradshaw, Ken Stabler, and eventually Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. And one of the guys who works on the show said, yeah, Greeny, they all wore 12, but who owns the number 12? And Ross, I've wanted to write a sports book all of my life. I've written a few other books. I've never written a sports book. And the reason is because I've never had a good enough idea. You know, to do a radio segment or a TV segment, you need to be able to fill up about 5 minutes. You need a pretty good idea to fill up a whole book. And I finally had it. So what we did was we decided, with outstanding research from the aforementioned Hembo, who owns every number in sports history from 1 to 100. And more than half of them, I think about 60 of them, are jersey numbers, but not all of them. So many of the numbers are records or years. For example, 85 is the 85 Bears, who I consider to be the greatest football team I ever saw. Some of the records, 28 is for Michael Phelps, because that's how many gold medals he won. And so so we found numbers for different athletes. It couldn't just be jersey numbers, Ross, because what I quickly realized, at first that was where the idea came from. So it was just going to be jersey numbers. But not only are there really, no one ever wore the number 100 and a lot of other numbers, but also meant that we would have been writing a book about sports legends and not having a place for Muhammad Ali and Serena Williams and Tiger Woods and other athletes from individual sports. So we figured out a way to do it, and that's where we netted out, and we're just thrilled with it.
Yeah, you know what, Mike? So first of all, I don't read books very often, and I'm not afraid to admit that because I'm so often either reading like Twitter to see what's going on in sports or football in particular, and I so often, Mike, have like an article I see while I'm scrolling Twitter. I click on it, and then so my Safari, my browser on my phone, there's always 10 articles at any point that I need to read that are like now. So I always say to people, like, how do you have time to read a book like that? But what I can do is I can do bite-sized books where for this book, every number is like a chapter. So I like that, because then it's like, if you're at the beach in the summer, I go to the Jersey Shore, being able to just sit there and I'll do 24 and 25 today. You know what I mean? And like, you don't feel overwhelmed or like I have to have 20 more pages to get the end of the chapter. I like bite-sized because it's almost like 99 short stories within your book.
That's exactly what it is. And they're quite short. To that point, each chapter that you're talking about, for those who haven't seen it, is about 2 or 3 pages. None of them are longer than that. So each one is right around 500 words. So it's 2 to 3 pages per. So about the length of an article. The research in it is outstanding. You will learn stuff. So here's what I like about it. One, choosing the numbers was fun. Some of them were really hard. So I mean, anyone knows that 3 is Babe Ruth and 23 is Michael Jordan and 42 is Jackie Robinson and 99 is Wayne Gretzky. But some of them were really hard. And what I will say is that whether you agree or disagree with the choices that we made, I think even the hardest core sports fan will learn stuff from the book. The research that Hembo did is so great that I learned so much about these athletes, even the ones I thought I knew everything about. So it's a little bit of sports debate and a little bit of sports history. And you're right, they're in very snackable little sections. And so I'm delighted you like it. And I hope that everybody who reads it will.
So I always like asking people this when they write a book because they always have a good answer. And you might have just said it, but what did you learn? Like, what did you learn writing this book, researching the book that you didn't really realize till you dove in?
So much. I mean, I would say in every chapter. So there are 100 chapters. There's one thing I didn't know. Like, I'm a sports historian, for lack of a better word. I grew up like while you were out there doing like push-ups and running drills, I was reading books about football players. And so I've always loved that. And so I consider myself a person who knows an incredible amount about sports, particularly sports history. I learned at least 100 things in the writing of this book that I didn't previously know. Here's my favorite, or not my favorite, but here's one of my favorites. The number 10 was a tough one. And my nephews are big soccer kids, as a lot of kids who are like, that age are.
Yeah.
They play FIFA and I know much less about soccer than I know about, football and basketball and baseball. So they were all telling me that Lionel Messi should be number 10. And I told them that I had chosen Pele, the legendary soccer player Pele, to wear the number 10. And they said, you can't do that. And so then I read them this. In 1969, at the height of the tragedy that was the Nigerian Civil War, there was a civil war in Nigeria in which over 1 million people died. A 48-hour ceasefire was called so they could watch Pele play a game. People literally stopped killing each other so that they could watch this man play soccer. That's the kind of stuff that we found in the book to go along with the usual array of statistics and things like that. And that was the end of that argument with my nephews. The day
that is unbelievable.
People stop a war. Yes, they stopped fighting a war because Pele was playing a game against their national team in soccer and they wanted to watch it. So it's that kind of thing. There's at least one of those in all 100 chapters. So
you're a well-documented Jets fan, and obviously this is a football show, and you were talking about reading football books growing up. And I'm sure you talked about this or thought about this, Mike, but if you look at the span of your lifetime, you're very successful, you're very busy. Have you ever thought about, like, is it a positive relationship? Like, are you glad that you are and have been a Jets fan and have invested this much time into it? Because it feels like for certain franchises, it feels like you put a whole lot in and not get a whole lot back. Have you thought about the relationship and whether you want to continue it?
Every day. I think about that every day. I'll tell you, I worked in Chicago for a really long time, and the Chicago Cubs are a beloved team in Chicago. You don't have to be a baseball fan to know their history. They went 108 years between winning World Series. So, I mean, literally multiple generations of people were born, lived full lives, and died without ever seeing their team win a championship. And when they finally won it, I've never seen anything like that. Being as close to it, it was probably the same in Boston, and there were probably, when the Red Sox finally won, and some of the other long-suffering franchises. But I have to believe that when the day comes that we win the Super Bowl, that it will be that much better. Like, it will mean more for all of the heartache that I have gone through, because it is inarguable that the Jets have caused me more anxiety, suffering, and pain than any other thing in my world. Not to bring like a sad element into this, but I mean it when I say that all I wanted in my life was to sit next to my dad. I grew up going to Shea Stadium we went to every game. My dad, we had season tickets before I was born. We would sit there on those cold December Sundays in the 70s. I would wake up and my mother would just start putting clothes on me. I would get up and I've got 3 thermals and I got the long pants and I got the ski pants and I got the this and a hat and the gloves. And we would go, and my father and I had a blanket that we kept in the trunk of the car that was just for Jet games. And we'd go and we'd sit and we'd watch the Jets. And my father always said, real fan stays to the end, no matter what. So we'd be losing to Oakland 32-6 in December. And we were 2-9 anyway. But we would never leave until the game was over. And all I wanted was to sit with my dad someday and watch the Jets play in the Super Bowl. And only in spirit now will I be able to do that. I'm starting to get worried about my kids. So like, I want them to be able to sit with their dad and watch the Jets play in the Super Bowl because they grew up with this sickness the same as I did now because I inflicted it upon them. It's genetic. And so I am really hopeful that day will come. My kids know, my wife knows, everybody knows. If the Jets ever play in the Super Bowl, we're going. My kids say, why can't I go to the Super Bowl, Dad? When the Jets play, we're going. And so we'll go to the Super Bowl and we will sit there, and that will be in its own way the best day of my life. And I have to believe that at that point that all of it will have been worth it.
You know, Mike, I can actually speak to this because I'm from outside of Philly. And when the Eagles finally won their first Super Bowl in 2017, it was unbelievable. I mean, the amount of grown men that were crying, the amount of people that called into the radio to talk about how all they could think about was their dad. All they could think about was their dad, or they were so glad they were able to experience it with their dad. I mean, even just, you know, the amount of 41-33, which the final score bumper stickers that people had. You go to the Jersey Shore, the amount of flags, like Eagles flags, it's incredible the impact that had on those people, and the Jets would be the same way. And honestly, Greeny,
I was at that game, by the way, Ross. Can I say I was at that game? I covered that game in Minnesota. I actually got pneumonia. It was so ridiculously cold that week. But that's a sidebar. I still can't believe they won that game. Tom Brady played the best Super Bowl of any quarterback of all time. He threw for 500 yards, no interceptions. His team did not punt, and they lost. If you go back, I should have someone do the research on this.
And they lost to Nick Foles.
And they lost. Well, and Foles, look, I mean, he was on a magic carpet ride. You know, obviously he was so good. And that was the craziest. So my brother-in-law is from Boston, and he's a big Patriot fan. And he was at the game sitting separate from me. I was there covering it for ESPN. He was there. He just got tickets and was at the game. And he's texting me, I don't like this. I don't like this. I'm texting him back. I guarantee you're going to win. But Brady, the way Brady is playing, there's no way he loses this game. I still can't believe the Eagles won that game. And on some level, I still can't believe they lost this one. I thought they were the better team, and I thought that they should win this game. And I think that I really hope, for the sake of the Eagle fans, that's not one they look back on really bitterly, because right now it feels like, oh, they'll be back. But I mean, how many times have we said that about people, about teams? And that was a better chance. So the 2 Eagles Super Bowls of recent vintage, forgetting the TO one, which I actually wrote about in the book. You know, the whole TO chapter in the book is about that game. The argument I would make is that for all the talk we give about Willis Reed, that the most courageous championship performance I've ever seen came from Terrell Owens, who absolutely would have been the MVP of that Super Bowl. He was the best player on the field for either team, despite the fact that his team lost. And he by no means should have been out there. So it's ironic that a guy who, for whatever reason, had a reputation for being selfish actually had maybe the most selfless performance in championship history. But anyway, you just made me think about it when you said it, that game, that Eagles win. And I was there. I stayed late that night. We were doing the late sports centers from there. So when there were probably only like 3,000 people left in the stadium, it was all the Eagle fans who were still sitting there just chanting, cheering, crying, laughing, drinking in disbelief So yes, that is what I hope someday will be me.
Are you all in? I mean, I've seen you elsewhere. I've heard you elsewhere. All in on Aaron Rodgers? Like, hey, this is a great move. When it eventually happens, this gives us a chance to win the Super Bowl? Or is there some trepidation about, when you brought in Favre, or the fact that Rodgers said he was 90% retired, which I don't believe at all, but that he said he was 90% retired? How are you feeling currently about Rodgers as your quarterback?
Well, I'm all in for sure. That doesn't mean there isn't any trepidation. But look, everything in sports, everything in life comes with some element of risk. The Jets have drafted quarterbacks in the top 3 twice in the last 6 years. One of them is bad, and the other one might be the worst player ever. So, I mean, those things come with risk, right? What are the options here that don't come with some risk? If we're going to roll the dice, let's roll the dice with a guy who we know at his best is about as good as anyone has ever been in history. We also don't need him to be the Aaron Rodgers that he was in 2010 and 2011, back when he was the most dominant player in the sport, or even the player who was the MVP of the league 2 and 3 years ago. The Jets are really good. The Jets defense is elite. Their playmakers are very, very good.
Yeah.
And if they get OBJ, which everyone tells me is going to happen, there's another one. The offensive line needs to get healthy, and they need to add a piece or two. That's why I think they're trying so hard to keep the 13th pick, because there's going to be a run on offensive tackles there. So you get someone like Paris Johnson or Peter Skoronski or one of these guys that will be drafted in that area. But if they put together the offensive line, Rodgers merely has to make a few plays, don't throw any ridiculous crippling interceptions, and sort of lead, give everyone the belief that this is a team now that can do it, because they're good enough in most other places. So I have trepidation because, of course, it could go completely sideways. He's obviously a very unusual dude, and who knows what the mix is going to be. But the upside is absolutely being a championship contender. If it goes right, then they're on that little list of teams that could win. Now, the AFC is so loaded that, I mean, I think the Dolphins and the Chiefs are at the top if the quarterback in Miami is healthy. And that's obviously a bigger if with him than most people. I think those are the 2 best teams. And then I think you go a half a step down, and I think and did I say Cincinnati? I'm sorry, probably Cincinnati too. Those 3 teams, Cincinnati, Miami, and Kansas City. Then you go a half a step down, and I think you get Buffalo and the Jets, I think, are right there with Rodgers if he's good. They're definitely close enough that you get the ball bounce your way one time, you could wind up winning the whole damn thing. And the Jets have literally never done that in my lifetime.
Yeah, and it's funny, Mike. The last thing I would mention is, I don't know if people say this, but the Packers offseason program starts April 17th. Now, I don't think he would do this because he seems like he's more the passive-aggressive type. But all this stuff, you read one day, Packers have all the leverage. The other day, the Jets have all the leverage. Mike, I'm just telling you, if he showed up for the first day of the Packers offseason program, the Jets have all the leverage. You think the Packers want him in the weight room or do $60 million fully guaranteed? I mean, if Aaron Rodgers isn't happy with the way the Packers have kind of put it out there that they didn't want him, and I don't know why he would want the Jets to have to give up more. All he has to do is fly to Green Bay, Wisconsin, April 17th, and go in that building. Because number one, it'd be crazy awkward, and number two, the Packers can't take the chance that he gets hurt and they're on the hook for $60 million.
100% right. Look, it's going to happen. In my opinion, there is zero chance that it doesn't happen. If it doesn't happen, I agree with you. If he did that, that would probably hasten things. That would bring things to a boil. The other thing that brings the deadline I've had in my mind has been the draft.
Right.
They're going to want players to put around Jordan Love. So they're going to want the Jets trading Elijah Moore for a 2nd-round pick. It's not an accident.
No.
There's another thing, another piece they can give up in a trade with Green Bay that the Packers are going to want. So I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen before the draft. I think when push comes to shove, the Jets will not give up the 13th pick. Here's what Mike Tannenbaum told me. because he's the one who traded for Brett Favre. They traded a 3rd-round pick and then a conditional pick the following year that was based upon certain things that happened with Favre there. Favre wound up not playing another season. He only played 1 season for the Jets and then retired and then unretired when the Jets drafted Mark Sanchez. So the Packers never wound up getting anything else. If he had played another year, then they would have been entitled to something else. What Tannenbaum told me was if the Jets had won the Super Bowl in Favre's year there, then the Jets would have owed the Packers a 1st-round pick. That's a trade anyone would gladly make, right? So give them whatever they want. Give them 2 2s this year, whatever it is they want, and then a conditional pick next year based upon how many snaps he takes and how much success the Jets have with him as their quarterback. And if they win the Super Bowl, I will gladly give them our number 1 pick.
Hey, everybody, make sure you check him out on social media at ESPN Greeny. And more importantly, pick up a copy of this book because I did. It's awesome. It's got your number from Mike Greenberg and Hembo, the greatest sports legends and the numbers they own. Very cool book. Perfect beach book. Perfect bathroom book, if I'm being honest. Like, this is the book to have where you have time to read for a couple minutes. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to finally get a chance to chat. Thank you very much for having me.